The morning I came home, there was no one waiting, just a single envelope, curled from the dew, lying crooked on the wooden porch where my father's boots used to rest after Sunday service. Funny how something as simple as a piece of mail can change everything. I stood there in full uniform, still smelling like desert sand and jet fuel, with my duffel slung over one shoulder and dust on my boots. No one had cared to sweep away. I had imagined it different. You know, maybe someone crying, maybe someone proud. But there was only silence, and that envelope. I bent down to pick it up. The paper felt soft, almost damp. The ink was smudged on the corner, but the words were still clear. Property sale confirmation, 74 Meadow Ridge Drive, finalized, 2 weeks prior. Transfer complete. That was my childhood home. My grandfather built that place with his bare hands after the war. My mother planted the lilac bushes under the kitchen window. And I painted the swing set out back 3 times because I kept choosing the wrong color. Now it was gone. Sold. While I was still serving overseas. I didn't even get a call. I sat down on the porch step, hands shaking just a little, not because I was angry, not yet, but because I didn't understand. My name had always been on the deed next to my father's. That was supposed to be my inheritance, my legacy, my roots. We'd spoken once while I was deployed. Just once. He told me Mom's arthritis was getting worse, and the taxes were high. I said I'd take care of it when I came home. That was the plan. And he said, "We'll talk about it when you're back. Focus on your mission." Apparently, they didn't wait for that talk. You know, in the military, everything has protocol. There's a chain of command. You don't make decisions for someone unless they're dead or unable to speak. But I was neither. I was just inconvenient. Later that day, I found out it was my younger brother who pushed the sale. Daniel, 2 years younger, never left town. He'd gotten in with a real estate crowd flipping properties, making smart moves, as he liked to call them. I guess he saw my absence as an opportunity. I called him. He picked up like nothing was wrong. "Hey, you back already?" "Thought it was next week." "Why is the house gone?" Dan long pause. Then Dad said we couldn't wait. The market was hot. You wouldn't have understood. Being out there and all. Being out there. I remember gripping the phone so tight I thought the plastic would crack. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. That's not how we were raised. But I said something quiet that even surprised me. You didn't just sell a house. You sold everything that held me together. That night, I didn't sleep. I drove past the house, my house, and saw strange curtains in the windows, a dog barking inside, kids' toys scattered across the lawn where I used to rake leaves. It was like I'd never existed. The next morning, I went to the county clerk's office. I had questions. I wanted answers. They said the co-signature authorization had been forged, that someone had signed my name. I sat in that cold, gray building, staring at a piece of paper with my name on it, but it wasn't my handwriting. I know my own signature. I sign it every day on classified briefings and security memos. I sign it on lives. But here, my name had been twisted into a tool, bent and used without my knowledge. And that's when the pain turned into something colder, something harder. Resolve. I filed the claim. Fraud, misrepresentation, property theft. People told me it wasn't worth it, that the house was gone, and court would be messy. Family shouldn't sue family, but they didn't understand. This wasn't about just a house. This was about dignity, identity. This was about standing up and saying I was here. I mattered. You don't get to erase me. I remember walking into that courtroom the first day of the hearing. The floor smelled like bleach. My boots echoed. Daniel wouldn't look at me. My father came, sat on Daniel's side. Didn't speak a word to me. It's strange how silence can scream louder than anger. The judge was a woman. Sharp eyes. Firm voice. Former Navy JAG officer. I'd learn later. She read through the paperwork, looked over at me in uniform, and then back at my brother. Did you think he wouldn't come home? She asked. Daniel shrugged, mumbled something about timing and best for the family, and then she said something I will never forget. She tapped the gavel gently, not to rule, but to hush the room, and she said, "This court recognizes the claimant not as a bystander, but as a commander who served this country while his name was taken. This isn't just paperwork. This is a betrayal." It wasn't about money after that. It was about reclaiming what was mine, not the bricks or the roof, but the right to say I mattered, that while I was gone, I still counted. I still had a voice, because when people take from you while you're serving, they're not just stealing property. They're saying you don't exist unless you're in the room. It took months. The case was slow. My name was cleared. The sale was ruled illegal. But the new owners had legal protections. I couldn't take the house back, but I got compensation. Enough to rebuild somewhere else. Somewhere new. But it wasn't about winning. It was about being seen. The last day of court. As I stood up to leave, the judge extended her hand to me. "Thank you for serving. And thank you for standing up even when it was your own family on the other side." I nodded, said nothing. There are moments in life where silence feels more powerful than words. Now I live 2 towns over. I built a small house. Nothing grand. Just enough for peace. The walls are clean. The porch swing is new. And no one can sell this one but me. Sometimes, I still think about that first letter. How quiet betrayal can be, and how strong you have to be to face it with dignity. Have you ever come home to find that something you loved was taken without your voice in it? How did you find your way back to peace? I'd love to hear your story below. People ask what hurt the most. It wasn't the house, not the signature, not even the sale. It was the silence. Not a single letter while I was deployed. Not a, "Hey, just so you know," or "We're thinking about you." No voice message. Not even a group text. I was 9,000 miles away, but somehow it felt like they'd buried me already. Like I had become a memory before I even had a chance to come home. When you're deployed, you learn to detach. You learn to survive without the usual comforts. You eat in tin trays. You sleep under noise. You joke in the face of things most people would cry about. But you don't expect to be forgotten by the people you thought would wait. There was a time Daniel and I were close. I taught him how to skip rocks down at Miller's Creek. I helped him with his math homework because he said numbers looked like ants crawling. I covered for him the night he dented Dad's truck. He looked up to me, and I believed, deep down, that bond would hold. Even if years passed, even if distance stretched, but war changes things. Time changes people. And maybe some part of him resented that I left and he stayed behind, stuck in a small town, with a sick mother and bills piling up. Maybe he thought selling the house was his chance to grow up, to prove something. But you don't prove strength by cutting someone out of their own story. After the court ruled in my favor, I didn't speak to Daniel for almost a year. He sent an email once, said something like, "Hope you're doing okay. It all got out of hand. Sorry for how it ended." No phone call, no explanation, just those 2 short lines. I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, but because there are some wounds that need time in the dark before you can let them breathe. Mom passed away 6 months after the ruling. Lung infection. Quick and quiet. I wasn't invited to the funeral. Found out from a neighbor who still forwarded me the church bulletin every now and then. Said it was a small service. Said Daniel gave the eulogy. Said he cried. And I stood in my empty kitchen that day, the one I'd built with my own hands. Every tile placed with care, and I cried too. But not for her death. I cried because I wasn't even part of her ending. Because somehow, somewhere along the way, I'd been erased from my own family album. It took a long time to accept that. There's a kind of grief that doesn't come with a funeral, the grief of being left out, of realizing that just because you share blood doesn't mean you share loyalty. And yet, something strange happens when the silence drags on long enough. You stop needing their apology. You stop looking for them in every photograph, and slowly, very slowly, you begin to reclaim your name. That's when I started volunteering at the high school, teaching leadership classes to juniors, mostly kids who didn't have much direction. Some of them had brothers overseas, others had no one, and I saw myself in them. The quiet ones, the stubborn ones, the ones who carried too much weight in their shoulders for their age. One day, this kid Marcus stayed after class, said he wanted to talk. He asked, "Sir, how do you stop feeling angry at people who hurt you, especially when they're supposed to love you?" I looked at him for a long moment, didn't answer right away. But then I told him something I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't wait for their love to come back. You build something bigger with the pain they left you. That becomes your strength. I never told Marcus what happened to me. Didn't tell him about the forged papers or the empty porch. But the next week, he brought in a photo. It was a little drawing, two stick figures holding hands. One tall, one small. He said it was him and his older brother before they stopped talking. "Do you think it's too late to write him a letter?" he asked. I shook my head. It's never too late. But write it for you, not to fix him. That's when I realized I needed to do the same. So I wrote a letter, not to Daniel, not to my father, not even to Mom. I wrote it to myself. I wrote it to the soldier who stood on the porch that day with dust on his boots and disappointment in his hands. I told him, "You didn't deserve what happened, but you survived it. And survival is the start of everything." I keep that letter in my bedside drawer now. Some nights I still pull it out. Reread the lines when the house feels too quiet or the past too loud. It reminds me that just because I lost something doesn't mean I lost myself. A few weeks ago, I got a message from Daniel. He's got a kid now. A boy. Named him James after our grandfather. He said, "If you ever want to meet him, let me know. I'd like him to know the man who taught me how to skip rocks." I haven't replied yet. I don't know if I will. But the letter's still there in my drawer. And sometimes, healing isn't about reopening wounds. It's about choosing which ones you don't scratch anymore. People think forgiveness is a conversation. Sometimes it's just planting a tree where something was stolen. Sometimes it's cooking a meal in a quiet house, letting the scent of garlic and rosemary remind you that you're still alive, that life continues, even if they're not in it. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not waiting for an apology that may never come. I've got my land, my porch, my new lilac bushes small, still growing, but mine. And when I sit out there at sunset, I don't think about what I lost. I think about what I built after the storm. Have you ever had to let go of someone who couldn't see your worth? What gave you the strength to move forward? Feel free to share your story sometimes. We heal through each other's words. The first time I saw my father again, it was in a hospital hallway. I hadn't planned it. Truth is, I was there visiting a buddy from my old unit who'd been in a motorcycle wreck. Wrong turn, rainy road, too fast. I was walking toward the exit when I spotted a familiar back, broad shoulders. That same slope in his posture I remembered from watching him mow the lawn. My father, sitting alone, elbows on knees, a paper cup of hospital coffee dangling from his fingers. He looked smaller than I remembered, older, tired, and I stood there like a ghost, watching him from behind the vending machine, unsure if I should speak. Because what do you say to someone who chose to stand with your brother in court, who watched you fight for your name and didn't lift a hand? I could have left, could have walked out and kept my peace. But something in me, not anger, not pity, just Stillness told me to walk over. He looked up as I approached, eyes narrowed at first, then widened. He stood, slowly. "Tommy," he said. No one had called me that in years. "I heard you were back in town?" he added, voice soft. I nodded. Neither of us said anything for a long time. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and old plastic. Nurses' shoes squeaked past us. Finally, he asked, "How have you been?" And I answered honestly, "Better?" He nodded, bit his lip like he wanted to say something else. Something more. But the words never came. It's strange. When someone hurts you deeply, you think if you ever see them again, you'll explode, yell, demand answers, maybe even break down. But all I felt standing there was calm. I didn't need him to explain. I didn't need his apology anymore. I'd already moved past the place where I needed his approval. And when you reach that place, you get to choose how to respond, not from pain, but from power. So I just said, "Take care of yourself, Dad." And I walked away. 3 days later, I got a letter, slipped under my front door. No stamp. The handwriting was rough, shaky. "Tommy, I didn't know how to stand between you boys. I thought I was doing what your mother wanted, keeping the peace. But now there's no peace, just silence. I'm proud of you. I don't know how to say it to your face, but I am, Dad." I sat on the porch for a while after reading it. Didn't cry, didn't laugh, just stared out over the lawn, the little sapling I planted last year swaying in the wind. Some wounds don't heal all the way, but they stop bleeding. A month later, I showed up at Daniel's door. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. His kid little James peeked from behind his leg, clutching a toy fire truck. I crouched down, smiled gently, and said, "Hey there. I'm your Uncle Tom." Daniel didn't say anything for a second. "Then you want to come in?" I shrugged. "Only if you're ready." He opened the door. We didn't talk about the house that day. Didn't talk about court or forged signatures. We watched the boy play in the living room. I noticed the old bookshelf from our childhood in the corner, the one Dad built. Same scuff marks. Daniel offered me tea, sat across from me, hands nervously tapping his knees. After a while, he said, "I messed up. Bad." I didn't interrupt. He kept going. I thought if I made something of myself, finally, maybe Dad would stop looking at me like I was second best. He looked down. "But I didn't have to burn your name to build mine. I know that now." I looked at him, really looked. His eyes were tired. He had lines in his face I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't the boy I left behind. He was a man now, flawed, lost, but trying. So I said something simple. "I don't need you to fix the past. I just need you to protect the future." He nodded. We've met up a few times since then. Slow steps, careful words. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a practice, like rebuilding a house with bruised hands. We don't talk every day, but we talk, and that's more than I ever expected. Last week, Daniel called me. He said James had a school event, Heroes Day. Kids could bring someone they looked up to. He asked if he could bring you. Daniel said he wanted to show his class his uncle who wore a uniform and built his own porch. I didn't answer right away. I just smiled into the phone. "Tell him I'll be there." You know, legacy isn't just property or inheritance. It's not just a deed or a title. Legacy is the space you hold in someone's heart long after you've walked away. Legacy is the story a child tells their friends about who inspired them, not because of a courtroom, but because of quiet resilience. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply stay standing. I still visit the spot where our old house once stood. It's changed, new paint, a garden in the back, wind chimes on the porch. But I don't feel angry when I see it now. I just nod, because that chapter's closed. And this one, this life I built with my own 2 hands, is finally mine. Have you ever faced someone who betrayed you and found peace instead of revenge? What helped you stand tall again? If you feel ready, share your story in the comments. We're all walking our own roads back to ourselves. Heroes Day at the elementary school was louder than I expected. The gym echoed with squeaky sneakers, folding chairs scraping the floor, and the soft hum of microphone feedback every time a kid whispered too close to the mic. But amid the noise, I spotted James right away. He stood near the stage in a tiny blazer sleeves too long, socks mismatched holding a construction paper sign that read, "My hero is Uncle Tom." The U was backwards. I don't remember the last time my chest felt that tight. He ran to me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and looked up like I'd stepped off a movie screen. "You came?" He beamed. "Of course," I said, smoothing down his wild hair. "You asked. That's all I needed." They called each kid up, one by one. Some had firemen, some had nurses. One little girl brought her grandmother who ran the town bakery said she saved people with cookies. Then it was James's turn. He tugged my hand. "Come with me." So I did. I stood behind him as he climbed the little wooden step and held the mic with both hands. He cleared his throat the way grown-ups do when they're nervous. "My hero is my Uncle Tom. He was in the Navy. He built a house. And he's really quiet, but really strong." Some kids giggled, but James kept going. He said heroes don't always fight. Sometimes they just stay. Then he turned and looked at me, eyes shining with something that wasn't just pride, it was recognition. When I got home that day, I sat on the porch swing as the sun dipped behind the pine trees. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of early autumn. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own story. I felt whole. The next weekend, Daniel came over with James. No big announcements, no formal talks, just a cooler full of lemonade and a bag of mismatched tools. "James wants to help you build something," Daniel said. So we built a birdhouse, not a perfect one. The roof was crooked and the paint ran, but we laughed. We got our hands dirty. We let the afternoon unfold like it used to when we were kids, before everything got complicated. And when James climbed onto my lap to hammer the last nail, he whispered, "I want to be strong like you one day." I held him close and said, "You already are." Sometimes I wonder how different things might have been if we'd just talked sooner, if I'd called more, if Dad had spoken up, if Daniel had waited one more week. But life doesn't rewind. It only gives you 2 choices: carry the bitterness or grow around it. Daniel and I still have distance between us. It's not a perfect relationship. We'll never be the kind of brothers who finish each other's sentences or show up unannounced. But we respect each other now. And that's something. We talk about small things: weather, car trouble, James's spelling tests, and sometimes, without naming it, we leave space for the big things to sit between us quietly. That's how healing starts, in the unspoken. A few weeks ago, I got invited to speak at the local veterans ceremony, small town gathering, fold-out chairs under the oak trees, brass band with more passion than pitch. I stood on that stage in my pressed uniform, the same one I wore the day I found the letter on the porch. This time, I wasn't carrying anger. I was carrying presence. I told the crowd, "You don't have to wear a uniform to serve. You just have to keep showing up. For your family. For your name. For your own dignity. Sometimes, the battle isn't out there. It's in the silence of a room where people forget you. And the victory isn't noise. It's stillness. The ability to say, I am still here. I am still standing." After the ceremony, an older man approached me, Vietnam vet, rough hands, glassy eyes. He said, I came back to a wife who'd moved on, and a town that looked at me like I was a stranger. Never found my place again. But you built yours. I shook his hand. Firm. Still building. I said. He nodded. That's the trick, isn't it? Yes. That's the trick. You keep building, even after the foundation is ripped out. Even when you have to use different tools than the ones you started with. You build not to forget, but to honor. You build so no one can take your name again. Today, I keep a copy of the old deed in my top drawer, the one they forged. I don't keep it out of spite. I keep it as a reminder that I came back. That I fought not with weapons, but with quiet resolve. That I turned betrayal into brick and shame into structure. And every now and then, when James visits, he runs to the porch swing with his toy hammer and asks, "What are we fixing today?" "Uncle Tom." I smile, open the toolbox, and say, "Whatever needs fixing, kid." Have you ever rebuilt something no one believed you could, maybe even yourself? What tools helped you start over? If it feels right, share your journey. Someone out there may need to hear how you kept going. Last winter, a storm rolled through town. One of those heavy, wet snows that coats the branches in white until the whole street looks like a postcard, until everything starts cracking. Around midnight, I heard the snap, went outside with my flashlight, boots sinking into fresh snow, and there it was. The young pine I planted in my front yard had split right down the middle. The wind had been too much. I stood in the cold for a long time, looking at that broken tree. And maybe it sounds strange, but it felt personal, like watching a part of myself fall again. I didn't try to fix it right away. I went back inside, made a pot of coffee, sat at the window, and just watched the storm. You learn something in moments like that. Sometimes you don't need to rush to fix what's broken. Sometimes it just needs to fall, so you can decide whether it's worth replanting or letting go. In the morning, I cleared the debris, cut what I could, stacked the wood to dry out, found the roots still healthy, still clinging. That's when I knew I'd plant again. Not because I had to, but because I could. That's how life feels after betrayal, after family wounds. At first, you think everything's been cut down. You walk through the wreckage and wonder if anything will grow again. But eventually, you find the root. Still alive, still waiting. These days, I don't keep many photos in the house, not out of bitterness, just simplicity. One picture sits on the mantle, me and James, at Heroes Day, both of us grinning under the school banner, his tiny arm around my waist. It's enough. I've learned that not every wrong needs confrontation, not every wound needs revisiting. There was a time I wanted to sit my father down, force him to explain, demand to know why he stood by and let it happen. But the older I get, the more I understand, some people are just built quiet. Not brave, not cruel, just unable. They love in whispers. They freeze in the face of conflict. And if you wait your whole life for them to say the one thing you need, you'll stay empty. So you learn to speak it to yourself. You become the voice they never found. Daniel asked me once, after a few cups of his overly sweet iced tea, "Do you think we'll ever be like we used to be?" I thought for a moment and said, "No." He nodded, like he expected that. But then I added, "And that's okay. We can be something new. We don't need to go back to being boys in bunk beds, whispering about Christmas wishes. We just need to be men who don't walk away anymore." There's a peace that comes when you stop chasing closure, when you stop checking if they've changed, when you realize that your healing doesn't depend on their remorse. That's when you start breathing different, walking lighter, sleeping better. That's when you become free. James came over last week with a school project, my family tree. He had pictures glued to construction paper, arrows drawn in crayon, a lopsided sun in the corner. He pointed to the top branch. That's Grandpa. And that's Dad. Then, a new branch to the side, marked in bold red marker, Uncle Tom, my root. I looked at him. Why am I a root, not a branch? He said, because you held the tree when everything else broke. I didn't know what to say, just held his hand and nodded. Sometimes a child sees you more clearly than the people who raised you. I've started writing again, not memoirs, not journals, just small things, thoughts, letters I'll never send, pieces of stories that remind me who I am. It's not for anyone else. It's for me, for the soldier who came home to nothing, for the man who stood in court alone, for the uncle who learned to stay. If I could go back and speak to that younger version of me, the one who stood on the porch with that letter in his hand, I'd tell him this. They will take things from you, things you thought were sacred, but they cannot take your presence. They cannot take your discipline or your power to rebuild. And then I'd tell him one day, a small child will look at you like you're the strongest man in the world, and that will be the only legacy that matters. I don't know what the future holds with Daniel, or with the memory of my father. Some doors close without noise, and that's all right. Not every story needs a dramatic ending. Some just need to be put down gently, like a letter you read one last time before placing it in the drawer for good. But I know this. I'm not bitter. I'm not broken. I'm still here, and I've made something out of silence that no one can sell. Have you ever grown stronger in the quiet after the storm? After the goodbye? After the letter? What gave you the strength to plant again? You're welcome to share below. Someone might find their root in your words. Spring came soft that year. Not the kind that shouts with fireworks of color, but the quiet bloom, slow crocuses pressing through frost. The smell of damp earth after a long sleep. I stood on my porch one morning, coffee in hand, and noticed something I hadn't before. The lilacs I'd planted last season, the ones I wasn't sure would survive, had begun to bud. It stopped me in my tracks. Not because they were spectacular, but because they came back. Despite the snow, despite the broken tree, despite the silence that once filled this place. And I thought so did I. I think a part of me always thought the world owed me some neat conclusion. A restored house, an apology from my father, a brother who brought back the deed and begged forgiveness. But life isn't a courtroom. It doesn't deal in clean endings. It offers you growth. Painful, uneven, but honest. And that's what I've learned to embrace. One afternoon, James and I sat on the grass, legs stretched out toward the edge of the garden. He was working hard on a popsicle stick fortress tongue, stuck slightly out in concentration while I mended a broken section of the fence. He asked me, out of nowhere, "Were you ever scared?" Uncle Tom. It caught me off guard. I set down the hammer and looked at him. "You mean in the Navy?" He nodded, but I could tell that wasn't really what he meant. So I answered truthfully, yes. When I came home, when I saw that everything I thought was waiting for me had been taken, that scared me more than war. He tilted his head. "But you stayed anyway." I did. Why? I smiled. Because I had to show myself I could build even when nothing was left. He went quiet after that. But later, when we were packing up, he looked at me and said, "I'm going to build things too, even when it's hard." That night, I sat with that sentence long after he left, and I realized something. All this time, I thought my legacy had been stolen, but it had simply shifted. My legacy wasn't tied to a house or a name on a piece of land. It was in that little boy's determination, in the way he looked at broken things and still believed they could be whole. Daniel and I don't talk about the past much. Sometimes we sit in silence. Sometimes he stays a little longer than planned. Once, He helped me sand down the porch rail, no big conversation, just the rhythm of shared work between brothers. Before he left, he said, "I used to think you were the lucky one. You got out. You had purpose." I looked up, and now he shrugged. "Now I think you're the strong one. You came back, and stayed." I didn't answer, just nodded. That was enough. This morning, I looked at that old deed again, the forged one. I thought about burning it, letting the past go in flames, but instead, I placed it in a box along with a photo of my mother's lilac garden, the court ruling, and James's crayon drawing of our family tree. Not to forget, to remember, but gently, to say, this happened, and I made something beautiful anyway. Last week, I was invited to give a guest talk at the local community college to a class of young veterans transitioning back to civilian life. I stood at the front of the room, wearing plain clothes this time, no ribbons, no ceremony, just a man who had been there lost, betrayed, but still standing. And I told them they may take things from you, they may leave you behind, but no one gets to define the end of your story but you. If all you return to is a porch, and silence start there, hammer, plant, write, stay. You're not forgotten. You are rebuilding. After the talk, one young woman came up to me. She said her brother had sold her car while she was overseas. She said no one came to pick her up at the airport. She said she hadn't spoken to her parents since. Her voice shook when she asked, "Will the anger ever go away?" I looked her in the eye and said, "Yes. But not because they say sorry. It fades when you stop needing them to fix it." She nodded, then hugged me like we'd known each other for years. We hadn't. But pain recognizes pain. So does strength. The truth is, not everyone gets the closure they hope for. Not every door reopens. Not every family stitches itself back together. But that doesn't mean you don't get to heal. It just means you get to do it on your own terms. You get to build the home they never protected. You get to become the person they couldn't be. Tonight, I sat on my porch again, the swing creaking softly, the lilacs now blooming full. The wind was warm, the stars bright. And I realized I don't wait for letters anymore. I don't expect the phone to ring with apologies, because the recognition I needed didn't come from them. It came from within, from the silence I survived, from the roots I planted, from the boy who calls me a hero. Have you ever found peace in places no one thought you would, or in the strength no one saw in you? If you're walking that quiet road now, know this: you're not alone. Your story matters. Your rebuilding matters. You matter. I'd love to hear your journey if or when you're ready. Thank you for listening to mine.